This is the story of Kiyoshi Okubo, a man who went from pickup artist to rapist and serial killer. From a young age, he always blamed others for his lack of success. Whether it was school, work, or life, Okubo always raged against society, the police, and those in power by preying on the weak and vulnerable. He especially liked young, beautiful, and vulnerable women, not because he actually loved them, but because he wanted something to take his anger and frustration out on. In his life, he would end up assaulting over 150 women, raping a dozen, and killing 8. He would change his name, lie about his job, and lure women to their deaths. He was known as the Lust Killer, as he had an extreme sexual predatory history from a young age. What made him attack and rape girls? How did he get away with so many crimes without being stopped? Who were his victims? How was he finally caught? And what happened to him? Kiyoshi Okubo was born in the Gunma Prefecture of Japan on March 17, 1935. Born into a family of 8 children, he was a child of a Japanese father and half-Japanese, half-Russian mother. Okubo's father was known to have mistresses and would sometimes partake in sexual intercourse in front of his children. With a sexualized father, Okubo would often act out in school. In 6th grade, he took a 4-year-old girl to a wheat field and stuffed stones into her genitals. After the girl's parents found out, he denied he did it. Okubo's parents defended him and refused to apologize, saying it was just a game of doctors. In junior high school, Okubo seemed to be even more disruptive, unstable, and erratic. His parents tried to send him to another high school, but he was kicked out after 6 months because of his absences and the tuition not being paid. Giving up on schooling, Okubo decided to work at an electronics shop in Tokyo, but was fired when he was caught peeping at naked women in the public bathroom. Having failed various times at school, work, and business, and being rescued by his father many times, Okubo decided he would get by on an allowance provided by his parents. Instead of working, he decided to pretend to be a university student and pick up girls on the street. That is when Okubo's reign of terror started. At age 20 in July 1955, he called out to a 17-year-old girl and started a conversation. He was witty, charming, and was able to take the girl to a park bench where he overpowered her and sexually assaulted her. He was arrested for the rape and was given a suspended sentence and 3 years probation because it was his first offense. Despite his run-in with the law, he continued to approach women. In December of the same year, he saw another 17-year-old girl and offered to give her a ride on his motorcycle. When she agreed, he drove to a forested area and tried to sexually assault her. Luckily, she was able to get away. He was arrested and this time sent to prison for 3 to 5 years. Since Okubo had been a model prisoner and seemed to have been rehabilitated, he was released 6 months early for good behavior. Unfortunately, his good behavior did not last once out of prison. Just months after being released, in April of 1960, Okubo pretended to be an activist who was protesting anti-war efforts and was able to convince a 20-year-old college student to come to his home. Once there, he pinned her down and attempted to rape her, but his parents intervened and she escaped. His father paid her off, and she agreed to not press charges. In 1961, Okubo began dating a girl named Hiroko under a false identity. They married in 1962, had 2 children, and by then Okubo ran a milk shop. However, his attempt to blackmail a delivery boy for stealing milk bottles led to his arrest for attempted extortion in 1965. While in prison for the second time in his life, his wife discovered his criminal past, including rape and sexual assault. After being released, his business closed, and Okubo reverted to his old ways. With the help of his father, Okubo was able to buy a car, nice clothes, and a new disguise. He decided to pretend to be a writer. In 1966, aged 31, he offered to drive a 16-year-old girl home. Once in the car, he drove to an embankment where he parked and sexually assaulted the girl. Then, just months later, he met a 20-year-old girl and drove her to a riverbank where he also raped her. She knew him, so when he let her go, she reported him to the police, and he was arrested. This time, he was sent to prison for 4 years and 6 months. Released early for good behavior in March of 1971, 36-year-old Okubo found his wife had left him and cut contact on his own brother's advice. Angered by his family's betrayal, he used money from his father to buy a Mazda, claiming it was for a furniture upholstery business. Instead, he acquired items to impersonate a painter, artist, or teacher. His resentment towards his family, police, society, and women intensified, escalating his crimes from sexual assault to murder. Less than a month after he was released, Okubo went on a murder spree in which he would kill at least 8 women in less than 2 months. The story of these heinous acts often began with seemingly innocent encounters. Okubo typically approached young women under false pretenses, often presenting himself as a teacher, artist, or other professional. He used this deception to gain their trust and initiate contact. He would meet women for drinks, share meals, or invite them to hotels, all the while spinning tales about his fictitious life. These meetings, under the guise of casual dates, were the first steps in a dance of deception. However, the mask would eventually slip. A moment of discovery would shatter the illusion. A request to see his driver's license, a mention of a family member in law enforcement. The victims, realizing the lie, would confront Okubo or threaten to expose him. For Okubo, this was the point of no return. Okubo's reaction to these revelations was immediate and brutal. The man who had been charming and persuasive transformed into a violent predator. Assaults, often sexual in nature, marked the terrifying turn of events. The final act of this macabre play was always murder, typically through strangulation, a chilling signature of Okubo's growing brutality. The disposal of the bodies was methodical and cold. Remote locations became the final resting places of his victims. Construction sites, riversides, shallow graves hastily dug in the dead of night. Each site was a testament to Okubo's meticulous planning and utter disregard for human life. As his crimes escalated, a pattern emerged. His method became more defined, his choices of locations for his heinous acts more specific. The psychological underpinnings of his crimes were complex, a mix of predatory behavior and a violent backlash against any threat of exposure. The mere mention of a connection to the police or the legal system by his victims seemed to ignite a particularly intense fury in Okubo. Despite this series of murders within a month, police struggled to link the crimes to Kiyoshi Okubo, even with reports of a cream-colored Mazda picking up women. It was on May 10, 1971, when a brother of one of the victims, refusing to wait for police inaction after her disappearance, initiated his own investigation. He learned from her friends about her meeting with a supposed painter. Finding her abandoned bike, he witnessed a man wiping it for fingerprints. After a brief encounter, he obtained the car's license plate and alerted the police, who traced it to Okubo. Despite visiting Okubo's home and ex-wife, they found no leads. On May 12th, a search party formed by the victim's friends and colleagues eventually located Okubo on May 13th. When apprehended by police, he was with another girl, casually telling her to take a taxi home. Okubo was finally arrested on May 14, 1971. Kiyoshi Okubo initially resisted cooperation with the police, taking 80 days of interrogation before confessing to his murders. Forensic experts matched over 200 hairs found in his car and on his clothes to the victims, using samples from the missing women's homes. Okubo's trial began on October 25, 1971, at Maebashi District Court. He pleaded guilty to all charges, including abduction, murder, and corpse abandonment, blaming his brutality on police mistreatment in previous cases. Convicted on February 22, 1973, Okubo received a death sentence, which was executed on January 22, 1976. This case was marked by numerous systemic failures. Okubo's parents seemingly enabled his behavior, repeatedly buying his freedom. The police were often a step behind, unable to connect the dots until Rieko's brother intervened, potentially saving more lives. The judicial system's leniency towards Okubo's early offenses, despite his repeated sexual crimes, was also criticized. Had those around Okubo, including acquaintances and former partners, reported his suspicious behavior, his capture might have occurred sooner. Okubo's manipulative tactics deceived numerous young women, luring them with promises of a glamorous lifestyle, only to brutally murder them. His notoriety as a ruthless killer of young women remains a dark chapter in Japan's history.